Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily update for May 25th, 2021. I have some news both from the economic front and also from the strategic front. Let's begin with the economy, which, there's a new poll out showing that both Democrats and Republicans are increasingly unhappy with the direction of the economy, which means they're in the real world because the economy is in terrible shape. Now, we have some news from Europe from a report from Helga Zepp-LaRouche, where she reported on the former chief economist of the European Central Bank, Jürgen Stark, who gave an interview in which he said that Germany lost its sovereignty and that the European countries are in the middle of a profound systemic change in financial policy as a result of the latest actions of the European Central Bank and the European Union. He said that what was called the integration process is what has undermined national sovereignty in the years since 2010, which is, of course, what Helga Zepp-LaRouche has been warning is the case in real time from that time forward. He's now reflecting back on it and saying, well, this is true. And he said that it's further the ECB, the European Central Bank bond purchasing program, which is occurring at the expense of financial stability and is causing an explosion of state indebtedness, especially in the southern part of the European Union. And he reports that there'll be an unbelievable total of 1.8 trillion euros that will be provided by the ECB in the next months. This is supposedly a recovery from the program from the pandemic, but he said this has absolutely nothing to do with the consequences of the pandemic. It's designed to enlarge the powers of the European Union. And he said it has nothing to do with the treaties on the economy and financial stability. So this is an honest report from a former director of the European Central Bank about the increase in power of that bank, which is really a side effect of the Great Reset. That is, the ECB is one of the central banks coordinating with the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve, the Bank of Japan and others, all designed to increase the power of the central banks to turn them into essentially a global central bankers dictatorship with power over and above any state, any legislative body in terms of making economic policy. Now, as this is going on, we're seeing the move into what you might call a pre-hyperinflationary state. There's an economist named John Williams who has a blog called Shadow Stats, and he's reporting that we're already into a hyperinflationary economic collapse. He said that the Fed has been creating money at a pace that has never been seen before, that we're up 75% in money creation on a year-to-year basis. Now, this is what's unprecedented. Normally, you have a 1 to 2% per year increase in the volume of money being created. But we're now having a 75% increase. So this is a indication of where we're headed with inflation. Now, I'll just give you one other example of this, the inflation of military spending, which is partly due to the cost of materials, but also due to the military buildup, which comes from the control of the war hawks of both U.S. political parties. There's an estimate put out by the Congressional Budget Office in its latest report that the spending to upgrade the nuclear arsenal, this includes nuclear bombers, missile submarines, and ICBMs, is estimated to be up to $634 billion to upgrade it. That's a 28% increase since 2019. That doesn't even include the cost of upgrading the B-52 and B-21 bombers. If you include that, the price tag jumps to $711 billion. So that's not per year. But if you think about a defense budget that's already close to $800 billion, and then you add this kind of 28% increase to it, and you're looking at an incredible increase in the amount of funds that's going to be going into the defense sector, the so-called military-industrial complex. Now, one other side effect of inflation, and this is a little surprising, despite the need for new housing, U.S. home construction fell 14% from March to April, largely due to price increases in building materials. So keep an eye on this. We've been warning for a while that the post-2008 policy was a policy of bubbles and ultimately inflation, and now possibly hyperinflation, with the full support of the Federal Reserve, with an eye on its goal of moving the United States into the Great Reset so that the central banks control all financial and economic policy. Now let's switch to the strategic situation. We have Blinken and Nod heading off to the Middle East. Secretary of State Antony Blinken leaves today for Israel, the West Bank, Jordan, and Egypt. And he's bringing a message of the so-called Biden policy on the Middle East. What's the message? We want to end the violence. Well, if that's the case, why didn't they clamp down on Benjamin Netanyahu and the Greater Israel fanatics on day one of the attack on Gaza? Instead, it went on for 11 days with massive destruction in Gaza, close to 300 deaths of Palestinians, and just igniting the hatred again between the two groups. Why wait 11 days before putting the pressure on Netanyahu to pull back? Now, the second part of his policy, besides ending the violence, is to talk about, to spearhead providing aid and assistance in a way to benefit the people, but not Hamas. Now, the government in Gaza is run by Hamas. They were elected by the people of Gaza. How are you going to reconstruct that area without having a relationship with Hamas? Now, keep in mind that Hamas, which is generally lumped as an Iranian proxy and an extremist organization, was actually backed initially by former Israeli Prime Minister and hard cop, rough guy, Ariel Sharon, to build up a religious movement against the Palestinian Authority, which was nationalist. The fact that the Biden administration is now finding it necessary to turn against Hamas shows the idiocy of all these policies, but it's not going to work. The third part of Blinken's mandate is no new peace process, which means, what are you going to say? Let's become friends. Let's forget about all this. Let's give you a little aid and maybe a little clean water and maybe electricity a few hours a day, and the people of Palestine should be happy. Only a real peace process based on economic development will address the hatred and anger that flared up after the Israelis attacked Muslims in the Al-Aqsa Mosque and moved ahead to evict families in East Jerusalem. So there's no, as Lyndon LaRouche has always said, there's no political solution. There must be economic reconstruction and development as part of a broader process in the whole region. The Biden administration is continuing to support murderous sanctions against the people of Syria, continuing to support the Saudi attacks on Yemen, although pulling back a little bit the funding, but not stopping, and is in the process of claiming to be negotiating a return to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action around Iran, but at the same time condemning Iran as a terrorist state. There's no coherence here. What is coherent is their fear of what happens if this region, if sovereign states in this region turn to Russia and China as the arbiters of their future. As the Russians came into Syria to help the government there defeat the terrorists, with some support from President Trump in the United States, but mainly the Russians and the Syrian army paid the brunt for the defeat of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And the Chinese are talking about moving the Belt and Road Initiative, extending it into the Middle East, into Southwest Asia, which would be part of a broader reconstruction program, which should be supported by the United States and Europe. And instead, they're continuing to attack and provoke Russia and China, push for regime change in both countries, as well as regime change in Syria and throughout the Middle East. This is not a peace process. This is not a viable option. This is a road to war. And if you add to this the earlier part of the report about hyperinflation, What better way to distract people from their inability to pay for housing, for medical care, for food, or virtually anything else than to have them focused on enemy images that we have to go to war against, and to convince them to sacrifice through austerity so that we can build up our nuclear forces. That's where the world is at present. That's why we need the new paradigm. So that's my report for today. I will see you again tomorrow. And go to the LaRoucheOrganization.com website to get more updates as the day goes on.